In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the front brakes on this Honda Accord. Pads and rotors located right behind your front wheel, so let's get started. Let's remove the wheel. Use a 19mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts, and then pull the wheel off. Sometimes the wheels are stuck, so give them a couple taps. Let's break the bleeder screw free so we can push the caliper piston back. We also have to remove this little cover first. Sometimes these get a little bit stuck, just be careful not to break them. Set that aside, use a 10mm wrench, break this free. Have a collection bucket underneath to catch the fluid. All right, sometimes these get pretty stuck. Work it a little bit back and forth here. There we go. The brake fluid that's dripping will also get into the threads and help lubricate it. So I got that free. Now at this point you can pull the caliper off and push the piston back that way, or if you're able to do this, use a pry bar, just go right between the pad or the rotor and the caliper. You'll be able to push the piston back in this way. All right, that's pretty tight, so while I'm holding pressure on it, I'm going to snug this up. With this snugged up, the piston should be pushed back most of the way. Now if this doesn't work, most likely either the piston is seized or the calipers are stuck in there, or even the slider pins. So you would have to do this once the caliper comes off. Clean this with some brake parts cleaner. Put the cap back on the bleeder screw so it doesn't get debris inside of there and get clogged up. Use a 14mm socket or wrench and remove the 2 caliper, 2 slider pin bolts, and these are going to release the caliper off of its bracket. Remove the caliper, flip it over and inspect it. If you see a lot of fluid coming from the piston, that obviously means the seal is blown and needs a new caliper. And this is when you would use your caliper depression tool at this point if you weren't able to push the piston back already, and push it in at this point. To avoid putting pressure on the brake hose, I don't want to let this hang. I'm going to hang it on top of the upper control arm. Now use a 17mm socket and remove the 2 bolts holding the caliper bracket onto the knuckle. Leave this one in a couple threads so I can hold it on while you remove the top one. And remove the bracket, set it aside for cleaning. These rotors will have 2 screws that secure them in place. They're Phillips head screws. If you don't have an impact driver like this to help you take them out, what you can do is take a punch and a hammer, tap these screws a little bit. This will help break them free. And hopefully they're not completely seized in there. And then you should be able to remove them with a little bit of force, or you could use a manually impacting screwdriver. Basically anything that'll create some vibration on these screws will help you out. Now you can remove your rotor. If it is seized at this point on the hub, you would just use a hammer and tap it off. Now we want to clean the surface of the hub. It is a little bit rusty, although not in horrible shape. But what you want to do is take a fine grit sanding disc or a wire brush or even a wire wheel on a drill and get this surface nice and clean, but without removing material. You don't want to dig into it with something very coarse and abrasive. You want to keep it nice and flat, but rust free. Rinse it down with some brake parts cleaner. And once you're done rinsing it, apply a thin layer of an anti-corrosive coating. In my case, I'm going to use some Anti-Seize. And you don't want a lot, because if you put too much when the rotor goes on, it'll actually squeeze it out and it starts flinging all over, and you don't want it getting on the pads or the rotor or really on your wheel or anything else. So what you want is to coat the surface that you cleaned so it doesn't seize the rotor or corrode and swell up and push the rotor out. And you want it nice and even everywhere. Go around this ring on the hub. That's where the rotor would seize if it does. Take your rotor and put it on backwards. I like to do this so I can have an easier time cleaning the braking surface. Use some brake parts cleaner and a clean rag. Just clean the oils, fingerprints, any grease that you may have gotten on it off of the braking surface. Take it, flip it the right way around, make sure you line up the mounting screw holes so you can actually secure it in place. Clean this side. Install your 2 little screws that hold it on. You don't need to make them extremely tight, just as a little tip. I like to put a little bit of grease on the threads and on the head of it. That way when it goes in and threads on it is less likely to seize in there. With this caliper bracket on my workbench, I'm going to remove the anti-rattle clips, flip it up, and clean right here where the anti-rattle clips are going to ride. Typically you could do this with a wire brush if the corrosion isn't too bad. In some case, you may need a little bit more cleaning, and you could use a sanding disc for that. Just be very careful not to eat too much material off of this. At this point, mine is fairly clean, so I'm going to coat it with a thin layer of silicone paste, but it is rated for brakes, so if you don't have high temperature silicone paste, you could use some brake grease. And you want just a little bit. If you put too much, it'll actually squeeze out once you put these back, and it'll get on the rotor. You want to avoid that. So once again, a thin layer, and then take your brand new anti-rattle clip and put it down all the way. Make sure it clicks and locks into place. There we go. And at this point, you'd flip it over and do the same on the other side. At this point, we have to remove the slider pins and clean them out. Now, if they're seized, you're going to have to unseize them and potentially either get new ones or a new caliper. If they're in really poor condition, take them out, clean them off. Mine are in very good shape, actually, and there's even fresh grease left in there. So that's a good sign. You want to make sure that this lip right here is clean. That's where the boot seals up, and you want it to continue sealing up because if not, water will get in, wash the grease out, and it will seize up. I'm not going to take these boots out since they're in good shape, but I will stick my rag in here and just work the boot around to absorb as much of the old grease as I can. I'm going to use that same silicone paste that I used earlier. I'm going to add some inside of the boot. This is going to act as a reserve of grease as it works its way into those folds. I'm going to put a little bit on the slider pin. Now you can coat it, but you can't load it up too much because it will get wiped off as you put it in. And you definitely want to get some right up in here on this ridge where it seals up. Slide it through. You'll notice that there's air stuck behind it that wants to push it out. Hold it, squeeze the boot. Do this again as many times as it takes to get the air squeezed out of this cavity here. There we go. Any excess grease will also come out if you happen to put too much. So wipe this off, give this a couple turns and twists. This is perfect, ready to go. So let's do the same on the other side. Now with the caliper cleaned up and ready to go, slide it over the rotor and line it up with the knuckle. Have your 2 bolts ready so you can start them in. Once one is started, start in the other one. We're going to bottom these out, and the torque for these is 80 foot-pounds. Let's put the new pads in. The inner pad gets a wear indicator that's going to sit at the top. Angle them in. It makes it easier to slide them through, and put the outer pad in as well. Make sure they move easily. If they don't, most likely you had too much rust here and you didn't clean up enough. Mine move freely, so I'm good to install the caliper next. Take that caliper and slide it over the pads. Push the slider pins in if needed to make space. Once you have this lined up, get your 2 bolts ready. Start them in by hand so they don't cross thread. Bottom them out. And the torque for these is 37 foot-pounds. Now do the same on the other side. Pump up the brake pedal. Let's top off the master cylinder. Let's get the wheel on. Start on all 5 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, we're going to torque them to 79 foot-pounds. Double check them. And take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.